you somebody that values resonance in guitar sound? Maybe you're looking for some ways to get more resonance out of your guitar technique and the instrument that you play. Maybe you have a nice handmade classical guitar and you just want to make sure you're getting the most out of it. It's firing on all cylinders and you're getting the most return for the energy that you put into it. Okay, we're going to talk about all those things in this video. Resonance is like a really nice depth and a nice body behind the notes that we make on the nylon string guitar. And for me, it's a very desirable quality, because when you hear a great player on nylon string, pretty much of any style, I mean, it could be classical or flamenco or something else, the attacks of the notes, the timbre, the quality of the tone of voice, it will differ. People are after different things. But all the great players, they have great resonance behind their notes. And you can hear when they play, you can just hear the top of their guitar just going nuts with the like the SoundCloud type effect. They're just getting a lot out of their sound, and to me it kind of feels like the guts of the guitar. It doesn't feel surface level. It feels like you're really in there and you're kind of pulling that out and letting it be a beautiful part of the sound. So I think it's one of the most kind of like virtuous things you can go for when it comes to guitar sound. Some people make a resonant sound really easily just because of how their hands are shaped. Other people have to work really hard for it. But even if you're that way, rest assured that I think it's one of the most valuable things that you can have in your sound. So I put together a list of 5 things that I thought these are the most important things in order to maximize the resonance on your instrument, on your nylon string classical guitar. Now these are all things that I do and that I check on all my guitars, because I want to make sure that they're firing on all cylinders, and I want to make sure that I have the best chance to make the most resonant sound. Okay, the most important thing, I'll go ahead and tell you, is the 5th thing. So you can skip ahead to that if you want, but I know you have the attention span to get through the rest of the video. But I'm saving that for last. But the first 4 things I'll go ahead and say, you probably do need a good repairman or a luthier to help you with, if not just outright do for you. If you have experience in these types of things, basically working on guitars, building on guitars, setting them up, dealing with action and planing fingerboards and all that, then you might be okay, but you probably know this already. If you don't have experience with that, I would find a qualified repairman or luthier that you trust, and they can definitely handle these jobs for you. If you need a recommendation, I would recommend Gabriel De Hoyos of Gabriel's Guitar Repair and Consignments. I'll put his information or a link to his website and information below this video. He's in DFW area, but he also has people mail him guitars from all over that he works on and then mails back. So the first 4 things are going to involve the physical aspects of your guitar, and they're kind of all related, but I just kind of picked one to start with. Okay. So the first thing is your hardware. By hardware, I mean I'm going to be talking about the pieces of material that your strings lie on. So at the bridge, it's the saddle. It's the piece of bone that sits in the bridge and the strings go across the bridge. Down here, it's the nut, where you have slots and the strings sit in the slots and they go across the nut there. Usually these pieces of material are made out of bone, although sometimes they may be made out of brass or something like that. So let's start with the nut. What you want to do is make sure that you can just look from the side and just make sure that you don't see any space there. You want the nut to fit really snug. Now, some people will glue their nut in. Some people don't glue it in, so when you take the strings off, it falls out. I think either of those is really fine, but you just want to make sure that it's a snug fit. You don't see any space in that area, and it fits pretty much as tightly as it can. Because if you have some space there, or if it's wiggling around, you're going to be losing some contact points with this piece of material, and you're not going to be transferring as much energy into the guitar through the nut. So make sure that you don't see any space here, any big gaps. If you do, you can take it to your repairman or luthier, and they can cut you a new nut, and they'll cut one that fits appropriately. Now, same thing for the saddle. For the saddle, you'll have to take the strings off, or at least loosen them, right? If you have like a production model nylon string, some of those saddles, if you loosen the strings, the saddle just kind of falls over. So that's going to tell you, yeah, there's a lot of space going on in there. But you can just see if it wiggles around with the strings loose, then it's not as tight and you're losing contact points, okay? Now, I used to work in Gabriel's shop, and he said the best test for this is, he said when he was fitting a saddle, and I saw him do it, he would shape it until he could kind of just barely get it in there, and then he said if you can pick the guitar up just by pinching the saddle and pulling the whole thing up, he said that's when it fits right. So that is a really, really tight fit. But you can rest assured that you're getting the maximum amount of energy conversion there. So it's a little thing, but it's a good place to start. Making sure that your hardware is cut properly, and if it's not, it's no big deal to have a repairman or a luthier cut you new nut and new saddle, and fit it, customize it so that it fits into your instrument just right. The next thing is going to be setup, and mainly I'm talking about the action. So when we say action for guitars or any string instruments really, we're talking about how far away are the strings from the fingerboard, okay? And even violinists and bowed string players, they use the term action. If you were to pick up a violin and you're a guitar player, you will see their action is so much lower. It's almost like the strings are sitting on the fingerboard because they don't have frets to deal with. But I have heard violinists talk about still dealing with action, like, oh, I put on these high tension titanium strings and the action is high, it's hard to play, whatever. So it's something that we all have to deal with as string players. When it comes to the guitar, basically, if you raise the action, it's going to put more energy into the sound. So that's good, right? We're looking for resonance. That will give you the opportunity for more resonance. But also, when you raise the action, it gets harder to play. You have to push the string down harder. It gets further away, and it becomes difficult the more that you raise it, okay? So what we want to do is find a sweet spot in there where the action isn't too close, isn't too low, so we're getting a really good chance to make resonant sounds on the instrument, and the guitar is set up to do that, but it's not too high to where it's hard to play, okay? And I have played guitars that were set up high for like maximum volume, maximum resonance, and I mean they had a killer sound, but too hard to play. So I definitely make sure all my guitars are in this sweet spot, okay? Now there are measurements for this. You can get one of these action gauges to measure your action, right? Or if you take your guitar to somebody, they'll be able to measure it for you, if you're not sure. But the kind of standard for the sweet spot is going to be 2.5 millimeters at the first string, and then 3.5 millimeters at the sixth string. So that's how far away from the top of the frets are the strings. And that is going to be the zone where your guitar is going to be easy to play, not too hard to play, but you're going to give it the best chance to make really resonant sounds. And then, not every single guitar is set up exactly with this action, especially if you are familiar with this and you have a specific playing style. Some people like a higher action. You know, if you're a big person with really strong hands, maybe you like a higher action, so that you can just really pound the strings and you don't have to worry about buzzing notes. And maybe it's no problem here. Okay, that's great. Some people that play really delicately, they like lower actions, and they say, well, I'm just super careful because that's how I play anyway, and so that works for me. Yeah, that's great too. But if you're not sure where to start, 2.5 millimeters to 3.5 millimeters is kind of the standard, and then you can kind of go from there. The third thing is going to be neck relief. So we use the term relief to say how much is the neck coming forward. Okay. When the luthier builds the classical guitar, of course they build it without strings on it, right? So they have to calculate, okay, I have to build it at such an angle so that when the strings are on it, and it's however many pounds of pressure, I don't know, it's like hundreds of pounds of pressure or something like that. It's a lot. With all that pull, you know, they want it to come forward only a certain amount, kind of like only a little bit. Yeah, they don't want it to come forward too much, but they don't want it to not come forward at all. And you will see young luthiers not have this figured out yet, because it sounds very difficult to me. But luthiers who have really, you know, perfected their craft, they know exactly how to build guitars so that you get the appropriate amount of relief. Okay. Now the thing about relief is that over the years, the guitar can gain relief. It can kind of come forward. In fact, I have a guitar that's a really nice guitar. It's built amazingly. It has an amazing builder, but over the years, it's slowly kind of doing this, and it has a little bit more relief than it should. And you can measure relief too if you have gauges for it. The numbers for relief are somewhere around like the 5th or 7th fret. You want 5 to 7 thousandths of relief, 5 to 7 thousandths of an inch. But if you have too much relief, what it will do is in the middle of the fingerboard, okay, you're going to have higher action, and it's going to be harder to play. So you're going to be hard pressed to do like a bar chord in these positions, okay? But in the lower positions, you're going to have reduced action, and you're probably going to get some buzzing and things like that. It's a weird combination of being too high and then too low. So you're definitely losing some resonance in this position, in these lower positions, because the guitar isn't set up to handle it. Okay, so the good news about if you have a neck relief problem and you have a handmade classical guitar is that it is fixable. The bad news is that it's a big job. So because these guitars don't have truss rods, and they don't have truss rods for a reason. I mean, I think they sound better without truss rods for sure. And that's just kind of how they're built. If you have a truss rod, you just, you know, would adjust it and you'd be good to go. But if you don't have one, what they do is they take out all the frets, and then they take a plane and they plane the fingerboard straight. You know, they're going to start somewhere in this area, I don't know, and then they're going to plane this part that's coming up, and they're going to flatten it out. And most fingerboards, like you can see, they're plenty thick enough to do that. I mean, it's not a ton of wood that they take off. They take off just enough to make it go straight. But most boards are like about this thick, or maybe even more. Maybe that's why they make them that thick. I don't really know, in case you have to plane it or do some work on the board. But they will take that relief out by planing it, and then you get a new fret job because you've just taken all your old frets out. And then you can do setup and then go from there. So if you're feeling that effect, like, oh, it's hard to play here, but here I'm getting buzzing, okay, and you can maybe just kind of see visually. Usually I can see it visually. It just looks like there's too much space, like the action is too high in the middle of the fingerboard. Then you might have a neck relief problem, and you can take it to your repairman. They'll get that relief out, and then they'll do a setup after that, and then you'll be in much better shape to get that resonance out of your instrument. So the fourth thing that will help you gain resonance is these little beady things that you use to string the guitar when you have a 6-hole bridge. Okay, and you can see this guitar has them here. So the first time I ever saw these was a long time ago, and it was one of the first guitar teachers I ever had. And I was having a lesson with him, and I saw that he had these beady things, and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, they're these beady things, and they you use them when you restring the guitar." And I said, "Well, what does it do?" And he said, "Well, they're supposed to make it sound better." And I said, "Oh, well, do they make it sound better?" And he said, "I can't really tell the difference." So I thought, "Oh, all right, well, what is it worth to try them then if they don't make a difference?" So then, 12, 15 years later, something like that, I'm working in Gabriel's shop, and he's telling me what to do with this one guitar we're working on, and he says, "I got a pack of these beady things, put the beady things on there." And I said, "Do they really do anything?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, if you have a 6-hole bridge and you use these, it makes the guitar more resonant. And I said, "You don't say." So I bought some, and I put them on my best guitar, which had a 6-hole bridge. And immediately, I could tell a big difference. And I thought, oh my God, these things, these little tiny pieces of foam that seem kind of inconsequential, they make a big difference, okay? So here's why. When you have the bridge, you're probably either going to have 6 holes in it, 1 for each string, or 12 holes, 2 for each string. They do make I guess it's 18-hole bridges. I've never seen one, but I've heard about it. So I don't know about that. I don't even know how you string that up, but if you have an 18-hole bridge, I guess I can't help you. But traditionally, guitars were built with a 6-hole bridge. So you have 1 hole for each string. And when you have that, when you restring it, you have to go through the hole and then come back around, and in some kind of way, you wrap the string around itself. And then you tie it, and then you put all the tension on the string to tune it to pitch. So when you do that, it pulls on the string, and it's going to take away some resonance. Okay, so for a while now, a lot of luthiers have been using 12-hole bridges. So when you have a 12-hole bridge, you don't have to do this. You just run the string through 2 times, and then you tie it on the back end, and then you don't have the string pulling on itself. And what that does is it gives you more resonance, okay? So if you have a 6-hole bridge, you have a couple options. You could take your guitar to your repairman or luthier, and they can actually make you a 12-hole bridge. All they do is they take a tiny little drill bit, and they figure out where the hole's going to be, and they just drill you 6 more holes. And then you string it up like a 12-hole, because it is a 12-hole now. And there you go. You're going to hear an increase in resonance, okay? If you don't want to do that and you have a 6-hole bridge, you can get these little beady things, okay? And you can find them at a bunch of different places. I think I just Googled guitar beads and they came up. They make them that are like hard plastic, like bead-like material, but I got the ones that are made out of foam. They're not like soft foam, like they're very durable. I mean, they gotta be, because the string is tied on them and it's pulling it, so I mean, you don't want it to cut through that little piece. But they're really ingeniously designed so that there's like a slot cut out in the back, so when the string goes around it, it doesn't run into the side of your bridge. It's just that little foam piece that's sitting there. So they're designed really, really well. And usually they give you an extra one too, which is nice for when you lose one, Then you don't have to immediately buy another set. You have another chance. But after you run the string through the hole, then it has a system, and it comes with instructions where you just run it through this beady thing, and that's how you tie it off. And it makes the strings be more resonant. So I didn't believe it until I tried it. Now I'm a firm believer in them. And every guitar that I own, it either... if it already has a 12-hole bridge, then you don't need them, so that's fine. Or if it has a 6-hole bridge, I just got a little set of beady things for it, and I use it. A couple of cons to mention with those, just to be aware of. For one thing, they are a little bit annoying when you restring. It's just kind of a longer process. If the 12-hole bridge is super fast for restringing, I mean, it's much quicker, straightforward. With the 6-hole traditional way, you kind of got to do some manipulation, and same thing with the beady thing. So it took me a little while to get used to it. It's not complicated, but I did struggle at first. Like, how do I make this work? And now when I am going to change strings and I look down and that guitar has the beady things, I just kind of think, oh man, like I'm going to have to do that. But it's definitely still worth it to do. I thought I would just mention that. The other thing is, I have one guitar that I tried the beady things on it because it has a 6-hole bridge, but the holes are, I guess, lower than normal, and so the beady thing was actually sitting on the top. It was touching the top. Now, I didn't like that, so I took them off, and I just don't use them on that guitar. And maybe that bothers you, maybe it doesn't. I just wanted to mention that. I don't think it's a good idea since the top is going to be moving. I just didn't think it was a good idea to have something sitting on it. I mean, I don't want anything touching the top. That could potentially keep it from vibrating as much, but also it would rub a spot, probably rub the finish away, and it might kind of damage the guitar over time. So I guess I wouldn't recommend it if you happen to have that situation where you put the beady thing on and it's touching the top. I wouldn't use it. You still could. I don't think it's like life or death, but that's the only other thing I think you might run into. But if you have a 6-hole bridge, you can have it converted to a 12-hole bridge, or you can get the beady things and it will make your sound more resonant. So now it's time for the most important thing, the big reveal. So the first 4 things all had to do with, the way your guitar is set up, right? How the hardware is set up, how it's functioning, how it's balanced, so that you have the best chance to make the most resonant sound with every stroke, right? And like I mentioned earlier, I do all those things with all my guitars. I make sure that my guitars don't have any of those issues, because I want the best chance to get the most resonance possible. But I've learned that those things do not produce the most resonance in themselves. Yeah, I think they're factors and I think they help, but not near as much as this final thing. The best way to get more resonance out of your guitar is to learn to play with a more resonant technique. Learn to move in such ways so that you make deeper sounds, so that the top moves more, so that you're getting these effects with more and more and more of your notes, okay? And I'll tell you the story of why I believe this. So a few years ago, before my teacher had passed away, one day I was in his studio and he tells me he's really interested in one of the guitars that I have. He suddenly just got interested in it, and he was like, would you want to trade, temporarily? And I said, well, sure. So I brought that guitar, and he let me take home one of his, and we traded for a few months. So I was super excited because I knew how his guitars sounded. They all sounded great. And I get home, and I'm looking at the guitar, and I was working in Gabe's shop at the time, so he trained me to just kind of, there's just things that you look for. So I start looking for this stuff, right? So I look at the nut, and I see like, oh, there's some space there. Like the nut wasn't totally flush. It was like leaning forward like this. And there was like a gap. He was losing some contact point. And I thought, oh, interesting. He was losing some contact point there. We'll come back to why it was like that in just a minute. Then I look at the fingerboard, and I see a bunch of relief in the middle. It's got a bowing thing, okay? And sure enough, in playing it, the action felt raised in the middle, like it was hard to play, but I was getting buzzes in the lower positions, losing the potential for resonance, right? So I figured that he felt it being hard to play, and to compensate, took the nut and sanded it down some, but it was sanded uneven, so when it went back in, it was tilted like that. And it may have made it better, but it didn't fix the issue of the relief, because we know how to fix that. You've got to plane it out, right? So I saw that, and I was like, well, definitely we're going to be losing some resonance here, okay? Then I looked at how the strings were tied. It was a 6-hole bridge, and they were tied in the traditional manner, where they come back through and they wrap around, pulling on the string and allowing for a little bit less resonance. So I was like, wow, I can see these 3 areas are not set up for maximum, achievement of resonant sound, okay? But then I played the guitar, and it was like 3 times more resonant sounding than any of my guitars. Okay? Now, this didn't really surprise me, because my teacher is the only person that I've ever known where I could just pick his guitars out of the lineup. If I was blindfolded and you were handing me guitars and I strummed a chord, I would be able to stop and be like, this is one of his guitars. Just because I've never heard someone have guitars that sound so ridiculously full. Okay? And how to achieve this, on one hand, I feel like I couldn't even really tell you. Like, I'm trying to figure these things out. On another hand, anything I could tell you is kind of like lesson material, But suffice to say that he had learned how to put the maximum amount of resonance through his technical approach, through the way that he moved. Okay? So, but there's more, though. So I start to play the guitar, and in about 30 minutes, I already notice it's sounding considerably less resonant. And it kind of blew my mind, because then the way that I interpret that is, that's just how sensitive these instruments are. I mean, they really can be trained, and they can be taught, and they can be pushed and treated a certain way and then respond a certain way, okay? But not just that. Within only 30 to 40 minutes of not being played that way, the general resonance dissipated significantly. So I thought, here's what that has to mean. Not only does he know how to use techniques that just get the result of a ton of resonance, but also with every technique that he uses, there is enough resonance produced to keep that level high in the guitar so that it doesn't begin to dissipate, right? Because you can think about like doing a big thick thumb stroke and like, yeah, it's deep and loud, lots of resonance, okay? What if you're doing scales? What if you're doing bright free stroke? What if you're doing quiet passages, okay? And what that told me was, in all of that stuff, his resonant input is still extremely high. And he's getting enough of pushing that guitar in the area of resonance to where it's operating on a very high level in that area and doesn't begin to dissipate. Because, I think like my sound was fine. It just wasn't near as resonant as his. And it only took 30 to 40 minutes before I could tell it sounds a lot less like him and it's starting to sound like me. So what that told me, what I learned through that, is that even though it had all these deficiencies, those are not the most important, or I'll say those ways are not the most effective way to get resonance out of your guitar. The most effective way is to produce it in your technique. Technique is the way that you play. It's the way that you move. I don't really think it's any more complicated than that. It's literally the way that you move, just like the way that you are. And do I think that guitar would have sounded more resonant if these issues were taken care of? Yeah, I think so. I think it would have sounded even better. Maybe some other qualities would come out if it were allowed to function with everything being really clean and really set up and firing on all cylinders, okay? But even though those things weren't taking place in these areas, it was trained and it was producing in the most important way. So if we're talking about resonance, that's the most important thing, the way that you play it. And if it's valuable to you, you pretty much center your work around it. I mean, I center my work around it. The first thing I do every morning with a guitar is just, I try to make the most resonant sounds possible. And that's all I'm really going for. And then after that, I want to duplicate that response as much as I can with everything else that I do. Because you're going to be doing a bunch of different techniques and playing different kinds of music and all this kind of stuff. But with everything, I want to get as much of that resonant quality as I can. And it makes a big difference. And over time, your guitar also, it really just roars like his guitars used to do. So I gotta say, I think that's the most important thing. Not something I think a lot of people want to hear. I think most people would probably say like, yeah, can't I take my guitar to the repair guy and have him soup it up and then and go tell my buddies, yeah, he's fixing it up for me, it's gonna sound like $1 million. Like, yeah, and that's real, and those things will help, and they're important, and I make sure that those things are all taken care of, yes. But it's not the most important way, it's not the most effective way to get more resonance. The most effective way will come from you in your approach. So anyway, those are the 5 things that I could think of. I hope this video helps you out. If it did, if you have any success, or if you don't have success with any of these things and you want to let me know, let me know. I love to hear about people's journey with their guitar. I'm on the same journey. I'm on the journey of playing the guitar and studying it and seeing what you can do with it, what you can find, how you can make the most resonant sounds possible. If you come up with something that you're like, well, this guy didn't talk about that and it really helps, let us know. That would be really valuable information. So, all right, thanks for watching this video. Hope it helped you out, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.